On a foggy Wednesday evening in the small town of Ash Valley, 16-year-old Claire Manning walked into the regional bus depot alone. The time was 7:26 p.m. Her phone's GPS later confirmed it. It was colder than usual for early spring, and the depot was half empty, just a few commuters pacing in silence, their breaths visible in the night air. Claire had missed her usual ride home from school. Her mother, working a double shift, had asked her to wait at the library, but instead, Claire decided to take the 7:45 p.m. regional bus on her own. She had taken it before, not often, but enough to know the route, enough to feel safe. But something about her demeanor that night felt different. Security footage, later pulled from a grainy depot camera, shows Claire pacing near the edge of the terminal, clutching her phone in both hands, checking it repeatedly, stopping, then pacing again. Not the bored kind of pacing, the nervous kind. The kind that doesn't look like someone waiting for a ride, more like someone debating whether to run. At 7:39 p.m., Claire glances toward the far end of the depot, then suddenly steps out of frame. That's the last time she's ever seen on any verified footage. The bus she was supposed to board arrived 5 minutes later. She never got on. By the time the bus pulled out at 7:47, her seat was still empty, and no one remembers seeing a girl matching her description in line. Her parents assumed she made it home late and went straight to bed. But by morning, Claire was gone. Her phone was dead. Calls went to voicemail. The GPS location dropped off near the depot sometime around 8:02 p.m., then stopped transmitting entirely. At first, no one panicked. Teens disappear all the time. Claire was independent, sometimes private, and recently had a rough falling out with a friend group. The initial police response was routine, standard report, probable runaway, likely to return within 48 hours. Her friends said she'd been moody, possibly upset about something, but nobody had seen anything that screamed a red flag, just a teenage girl who maybe needed space. But as the hours ticked by, the tone shifted. Claire never withdrew cash, never messaged anyone. Her social accounts remained untouched. Her locker at school was still full. Her toothbrush was at home. Her sketchbook, something she never left behind, was still on her nightstand. On day 2, her parents were knocking on doors, printing flyers, begging for footage from local businesses. A gas station 2 blocks from the depot caught someone walking east on foot that night, but it was too dark, too distant to confirm if it was Claire. Investigators revisited the depot camera. They zoomed, cropped, enhanced. The timestamp was held, 7:39 p.m. Claire walks off screen, but where she went no one could tell. The angle didn't catch the far end of the platform, and the only camera facing that side had been out of service for months. What baffled detectives was the complete lack of trace afterward. No credit card use, no contact, no sightings, and no pings on her device. If she had simply run away, she'd likely still need to eat. I still need shelter, still show up somewhere. Instead, she vanished like smoke. By day 4, the town of Ash Valley began to buzz with unease. Local forums filled with speculation. Was it trafficking? Was there someone waiting for her? Has she been catfished? Had someone from school followed her there? Every theory felt too wild, and yet somehow not wild enough. The only tangible fact was the security footage, and even that stopped just before she disappeared. A teenage girl, nervous and alone, standing on the edge of a terminal, waiting for a bus she never boarded, looking toward something or someone just outside the frame. And then gone. What began as a simple missing person report was beginning to twist into something much darker, something that didn't follow the usual patterns, something that no longer looked like a runaway. By the time Thursday morning arrived, the unease in the Manning household had hardened into something heavier, something sharp and unnatural. Claire's bed was still made. Her phone was unreachable. Breakfast sat untouched on the kitchen counter. At 8:06 a.m., her mother, Rachel, called the school, hoping for a mix-up, but Claire hadn't checked in. She never made it to the first period. Rachel called her husband, Dan, at work. By 8:27, they were at the police station, filing a missing persons report. The desk officer on duty took down the information without urgency. A 16-year-old missing overnight? It sounded familiar. Too familiar. Standard procedure kicked in. Wait 24 to 48 hours. Most of the time, they come back. Teens fight with their parents. They blow off steam. They hide out at a friend's house. But Rachel was adamant. Claire wasn't that kind of girl. She wasn't impulsive. She was scheduled, routine-oriented. She had plans to meet her friend Sophie the next afternoon. She had left her overnight bag, her sketchbook, and her asthma inhaler at home. Things she wouldn't forget. By early afternoon, the file was active, but the tone from law enforcement hadn't shifted. Officers were polite but dismissive. The implication, even if unspoken, was clear. Claire had likely left on her own. Maybe it was a fight, a boy, some online drama, but nothing violent, nothing criminal. That assumption colored the early investigation. No Amber Alert was issued. No ground teams were activated. Claire's case joined the stack of low-priority open reports. Still, protocol required a cursory check of the bus station, so a patrol officer stopped by around 4 p.m. that day. No blood, no signs of struggle, nothing visibly wrong. A depot staff member remembered seeing a girl who might have been Claire near the vending machines, but couldn't say for sure. The officer marked it in the report and left within 20 minutes. It wasn't until Claire's parents returned later that night, retracing their daughter's possible steps, that something new emerged. Behind the last row of vending machines, wedged partially beneath a radiator and a strip of discarded receipts, Dan found half of a torn bus pass. It was still valid, time-stamped for Wednesday at 7:40 p.m. Her name was printed faintly on the edge. The pass had been torn clean down the middle. Rachel recognized it immediately. She had loaded the card for Claire herself earlier that week. When they brought it to the police, it was entered into evidence, but its implications were left open. Maybe it was dropped. Maybe Claire had been upset. Maybe it meant nothing. But the Mannings didn't believe that. That night, Rachel began calling Claire's friends directly. Most hadn't seen her since school the day before. A few thought she'd gone home early. One said Claire mentioned taking the 7:45 bus. No one mentioned any drama. No boyfriend. No falling out. No signs of distress. Just a regular day. Dan reviewed Claire's laptop. Nothing stood out. No suspicious messages. No dark searches. Her most recent tabs were for a math assignment, a playlist titled Art Night, and an Amazon link for new markers she'd wanted. It wasn't until the early hours of Friday morning, as Rachel sat alone in Claire's bedroom, clutching her sketchbook and staring at the missing corner where her daughter's presence once lived, that the gravity of the situation fully settled in. This wasn't rebellion. It wasn't a drama. Something was deeply wrong. Claire hadn't run. Claire had vanished, and someone, somewhere, had to know why. By the third day of Claire's disappearance, detectives finally began to widen the scope. The torn bus pass, her total digital silence, and her family's insistence that this was out of character pushed the case from probable runaway to something less easily defined. The department's cybercrimes liaison was called in to assist. Claire's phone had last pinged off a cell tower near the depot at 8:02 p.m. on the night she vanished. Then it went dark. No further signals, no outgoing calls, no texts, no app activity. Either the phone had been powered off or someone had destroyed it. Her service provider sent over a full log of her text history. Most of it was what you'd expect from a teenage girl. Group chats with classmates, short messages to her parents, one-liners with Sophie, her best friend. But one message stood out. It arrived the evening she vanished, at 7:33 p.m., just 12 minutes before the bus she was supposed to board was scheduled to arrive. The number wasn't in her contacts. The message was short. Outback. Come alone. No name, no emojis, no follow-up. And Claire had never responded. At least, not in the official record. Investigators traced the number. It led to a prepaid burner phone purchased with cash from a gas station 2 towns over. No ID, no facial recognition from cameras in the area, and no way to confirm who sent the message. Detectives interviewed the store clerk, but it had been over a week, and nothing about the buyer stood out. Male, female, young, old, no one remembered. It was a dead end, but not the only one. When detectives brought Sophie in for a formal interview, she broke down. She admitted that Claire had been talking to someone online for a few weeks. She didn't know much, just that Claire had mentioned a guy, someone older, maybe 20s. They'd never met in person, according to Claire, but she'd been vague about the details. Sophie had warned her to be careful, but Claire brushed it off. The username was something generic. Maybe Stray Orbit or Night Shift Echo. Sophie wasn't sure. She'd only heard it mentioned once in passing. Authorities submitted emergency data requests to the major social media and messaging platforms Claire used. On one app, typically reserved for niche chat rooms, investigators found a registered account linked to Claire's email. The account had been active through her phone until the night she vanished. When they gained access, almost everything had been wiped. No message history, no usernames. The chat room had been deleted. The app log showed a total of 38 messages exchanged between Claire and another user in a private room, now inaccessible. The deletion had occurred remotely, using two-factor authentication, less than 2 hours after Claire was reported missing. What disturbed investigators most was the timing. Whoever deleted the chat had access to Claire's login credentials. That meant one of two things. Either Claire had wiped it herself, which seemed unlikely given the secrecy, or someone else had possession of her phone after she disappeared. The theory of her voluntarily running away became harder to justify. Detectives ran digital forensics on Claire's laptop and tablet. Her laptop had no record of the app, but the tablet's browser history showed several recent visits to online safety forums. One search stood out: how to tell if someone is pretending online. That was 5 days before she vanished. No one in Claire's circle recognized the username Sophie remembered. No matches came up in public forums. It was like chasing a ghost, someone who knew how to remain invisible. Investigators requested a list of IP addresses tied to the deleted chat room, and one caught their attention. It was registered to a business Wi-Fi connection, an auto repair shop 2 miles from the bus depot. When questioned, the manager said their public Wi-Fi was unprotected, open to customers and people loitering outside. No security cameras, no login trail. Another lead that went nowhere. By the end of the week, the digital trail was growing colder. The anonymous number, the deleted messages, the wiped history, it all pointed to premeditation. Someone had gone to great lengths to erase their communication with Claire. Someone who had planned for this. And as investigators stared at the empty chat log, they were left with a chilling realization: the only person who could have helped them understand what had been said in that chat room was gone. Exactly 1 week after Claire Manning vanished from the Ash Valley bus station, a delivery driver from a regional snack company came forward with something police hadn't seen before. He'd been on a routine route the night Claire disappeared, making a supply drop at a convenience store directly across from the depot's south parking lot. Like many fleet vehicles, his van was outfitted with a dash cam, mostly for insurance purposes in case of accidents. He hadn't thought much about it until his manager asked him to double-check the footage after hearing about the missing girl on local news. What he found was unsettling. The video, time-stamped 7:41 p.m., just minutes after Claire was last seen on the depot's interior camera, shows a man standing near the side lot, half shrouded by a row of trash bins in the shadow of the depot's back wall. He's wearing a hooded blue windbreaker with white stripes down the arms. His posture is casual but alert. For about 30 seconds, he paces in a tight circle, then suddenly stops and makes a quick hand motion, like a wave or a signal, toward the corner of the building, right where depot cameras had no coverage. A second later, he turns and walks briskly out of frame. No vehicle is seen. No face is clearly visible. But the timestamp lines up too closely to ignore. The footage was turned over to Ash Valley PD and quickly escalated to lead evidence. For the first time, investigators had something tangible, a possible visual of the last person to interact with Claire Manning. The man's walk, his body type, his windbreaker, everything about it raised alarms. It wasn't enough to identify him, but it was enough to focus the investigation. Officers canvassed the surrounding blocks, asking shop owners and residents if they recognized the jacket or had seen someone matching the man's build. Most people hadn't. A few claimed it Looked like someone who hangs out behind the bowling alley, but nothing stuck. The face was too obscured. The footage was sent to the state lab for enhancement. Technicians tried to sharpen the frames, isolate the figure, clarify the shadows, but the resolution hit a wall. Too grainy, too far. The most they could say with certainty was that the jacket was distinctive. Mid-weight, likely nylon, royal blue, possibly Adidas. Someone somewhere had to have seen it. Local police issued a public statement asking anyone who recognized the man or his clothing to come forward. Over the next 3 days, tips began to trickle in, but they went nowhere. One caller said it was her ex-boyfriend, but he was out of state. Another claimed the jacket belonged to a man who sometimes slept behind the bus station. Officers found him, ran his name, but his alibi held. Yet another. Tip came from an anonymous source who claimed to have seen Claire speaking with someone in blue the week prior, but they couldn't give a date or location. The investigation became a loop of almost everything, every new lead feeling like it might crack the case, only to dissolve under scrutiny. And then came the speculation. Local message boards lit up with theories. Some believed Claire had been catfished and lured to the side lot by someone pretending to be a friend online. Others were convinced the man in the windbreaker was a former employee of the depot who knew the blind spots in the building's security. A few believed he was simply a bystander in the wrong place at the wrong time. But the most persistent theory, the one whispered at grocery stores, in high school hallways, in late-night conversations among friends, was that Claire had known the person she met that night, that the message to come out back had been from someone she trusted, or at least thought she could trust. The discovery of the man in the blue windbreaker didn't solve the mystery. If anything, it made it darker. Claire's disappearance no longer looked spontaneous. It didn't look like a runaway. It looked orchestrated, planned. Someone had waited in the shadows, just out of view, and Claire had gone to them willingly, or unknowingly. And if the signal was meant for her, the question that no one could answer was this: did she know what was waiting around that corner? Or did she never see it coming? By the 10th day, the silence had changed. It wasn't just the absence of Claire's voice, or the dull ache of an untouched bedroom, or the way dinner plates sat longer on the table, as if someone was still expected. It was a new kind of silence, unnerving, unnatural, one that didn't feel empty but watched. And then the call started. It began just after midnight. Rachel Manning had fallen asleep on the living room couch with the porch light still on. Dan was in the garage, rereading printouts of maps from around the bus depot. Their phones were never set to silent now, always ready. When Rachel rang, she picked it up without thinking. No caller ID. She answered, hopeful. But no one spoke, just faint static, like wind through a radio. Then a click. The line went dead. She stared at the screen for a long moment, heart pounding. A minute later, Dan's phone lit up. Same thing. No voice, no background noise except that eerie, distant static. Then silence. It happened again the next night, and the night after that, always after midnight, always the same sound. The calls weren't traceable. They came from numbers that didn't exist or were immediately deactivated. The police filed the reports but offered little explanation. Spoofed numbers, prank calls. Grief makes people see patterns, they said. But Rachel knew the difference between a prank and a message. She just didn't know what the message was. Then came Josh, Claire's 10-year-old brother. Had been quiet through most of the chaos. He wasn't allowed to watch the news, but he knew more than they realized. One morning, without prompting, he told Rachel that he'd seen something outside 2 nights ago. A man, standing at the edge of the woods behind their backyard, watching the house. When she asked what he looked like, Josh said he was wearing a blue jacket, like the one on TV. Rachel froze. She asked why he hadn't told them sooner. He just shrugged. I thought maybe it was Claire coming back. They didn't call the police right away. Rachel didn't know if she could bear being told again that it was nothing, that kids make things up, that grief skews perception. But Dan went outside that night and walked the tree line himself. He didn't find anything. No footprints, no broken branches, just the same crushing stillness. But the next morning, A single blue thread, nylon frayed at the edge, was caught on a thorn bush near the back fence. He kept it in a Ziploc bag, even though the police would later say it could have come from anything. A tarp, a tent, a jacket, no way to trace it. The distance between the Mannings and the investigators grew wider. The family no longer felt like partners in a search. They felt like afterthoughts. Claire's case wasn't closed, but it wasn't active either. A detective still answered Rachel's calls, but with less urgency, fewer updates. The same phrases repeated like clockwork. "We're doing everything we can. We're waiting on digital leads. We understand how hard this is." But Rachel had started to wonder if they believed Claire was even alive. The town around them began to shift too. Neighbors avoided eye contact in the supermarket. Teachers stopped asking how they were holding up. At first, Claire's photo had been posted in nearly every shop window and coffee stand in Ash Valley. But slowly, quietly, the flyers began to peel away, replaced by job ads and lost pet signs. Claire's disappearance became a soft murmur, something whispered, not spoken. People speculated. Was she lured? Did she plan it? Was there more to the story? Everyone had an opinion. No one had answers. And in the middle of all of it, the Manning house felt less like a home and more like a waiting room for news that never came. Rachel stopped sleeping in her bed. Dan lost weight. Josh withdrew. Family photos were taken down because they were too painful to look at. Holidays passed with chairs left empty. Their world had narrowed to one question, endlessly looping. Where is Claire? And just when it felt like the weight of not knowing couldn't get heavier, another voicemail came through. No static this time, just 5 seconds of silence. Then a breath. Just one. Faint. Close to the microphone. Then the line went dead. And for the first time, Rachel didn't just feel fear. She felt something worse, like maybe Claire wasn't gone, maybe she was still out there, and maybe someone wanted them to know. 9 days after Claire Manning disappeared, a man named Louis Garza sat hunched over an old desktop in the back office of Ash Valley's Transit Maintenance Division, watching grainy footage frame by frame. He wasn't law enforcement or FBI. He was a mid-level city employee, responsible for inventory, inspections, and the occasional retrieval of old security recordings when lawyers or insurance reps came calling. He'd heard about the missing girl. Everyone in town had. But he hadn't realized his office might hold anything relevant until an offhand comment from his supervisor jogged something loose, that the roof-mounted auxiliary camera above the north wing hadn't been reviewed yet. It wasn't on the regular system. It had been installed during a renovation project in 2019, then largely forgotten. No one thought it would capture anything useful. It pointed at the old delivery lane behind the depot, a space rarely used anymore. But when Garza pulled the file from the archive drive and scrubbed it on the night of March 3rd, he froze. The timestamp read 8:03 p.m. The frame showed Claire. Alone at first, walking slowly toward a narrow side gate on the north side of the building. She looked over her shoulder once briefly, then kept going. And then, there he was, the man in the windbreaker, 5 paces behind her, not rushing, not hiding, just following with deliberate calm. He looked ahead, not at her, like he already knew where they were going. A few more frames. Claire rounds the corner. The man follows. Then, nothing. They vanish behind the edge of the building. The camera's limited angle cuts off the rest. The footage was forwarded immediately to investigators. It changed everything. Now, for the first time, they had visual confirmation that Claire hadn't left the depot alone, and that she had made it out the side gate. Alive. Officers returned to the station with a different urgency. This time, they weren't just looking for evidence. They were retracing Claire's exact final steps. The north gate had been locked from the inside when they first checked it, 9 days earlier. But the latch had rusted. Someone could have forced it. And no one had thought to look beyond that section of the building because technically it wasn't even part of the active depot anymore. Behind the gate was a narrow alley that wrapped around to a disused maintenance corridor, originally built for utility access but abandoned years ago. Dumpsters lined the wall. A broken electrical panel, old signage from when the depot had been under different management. At the far end of the alley was a service door. It was dented, rusted, and secured with a bolt that had been snapped in half. They forced it open. Inside, they found what looked like a forgotten storage unit, long, windowless, and cold. The air was stale, metallic. The only light came from a dangling low-watt bulb someone had screwed into an old socket overhead. There was a blanket spread. Across flattened cardboard boxes, 2 empty water bottles, and a half-full bag of trail mix tucked into the corner. A pair of disposable gloves, a plastic spoon, a backpack, worn and torn, no identifying markings, but no Claire. CSI swept the space for prints and fibers. They recovered hair samples. They found the remains of duct tape in the trash. The evidence was clear. Someone had been staying there. Possibly 2 people, possibly recently. No surveillance camera had eyes on this space. No employee had used the access corridor in months. What haunted detectives was the implication. Claire had likely been taken there, hidden in plain sight, less than 300 feet from where her family had stood 9 days earlier, begging for answers. While officers combed the town, posted flyers, and chased dead-end tips, she may have been just a few walls away, behind a door no one thought to open. For the first time, the investigation had momentum. The news broke fast. Headlines read, "Hidden space found at depot, new clue in teen disappearance." But behind the press statements and cautious optimism, there was dread. The room didn't look like a crime scene. It looked like a holding place, a stop along the way. Whoever brought Claire there, if she had been there, was gone, and they had taken everything that mattered with them. And the question was no longer just where Claire went. It was how long she had been that close before being moved again. When the forensics team returned to the depot's disused maintenance room, they weren't looking for hope. They were looking for traces, anything left behind. What they found was something no one expected. A sealed wall panel, tucked behind a stack of rusted shelving and broken mop buckets, caught the attention of a technician. At first glance, it looked like part of the original wall, painted over and aged like everything else in the building. But there was a seam, nearly invisible, along the right edge. And when they pried it open, what was behind it stopped everyone cold. Inside was a hidden enclosure, roughly the size of a walk-in closet. The air was dry, stale. A single mattress pad lay on the floor, stained and thin. There were 2 water bottles, a crushed packet of crackers, an old sweatshirt, and a pair of socks. Along the wall sat a burner phone. Its battery drained, the screen cracked. The space was quiet, abandoned, but not old. Someone had been here, recently. The narrow layout made sense now. Whoever used this space didn't want to be found. They didn't want anyone to hear anything from the other side. The crime scene team moved carefully. They cataloged everything. DNA swabs were taken from the mattress, from the clothing, from the phone casing. And then the results came in. Claire's DNA was on the sweatshirt and one of the bottles. Hair strands pulled from the corner matched her profile. She had been there, alive, at some point in the last 9 days. Mixed with her DNA was a second profile. Unknown male, not in any criminal database. The realization hit hard. Claire hadn't just been near the depot. She had been inside the depot, behind a wall. While the town searched, volunteers handed out flyers while police walked the same halls just feet away. Claire had been hidden. The burner phone was rushed to digital forensics, but there wasn't much left. The SIM had been removed. The logs were wiped. Only a few partial timestamps remained. One registered a network signal on day 2 of her disappearance. Another briefly pinged a tower nearby on day 4. After that, nothing. The space was abandoned by the time police found it, but it hadn't been empty for long. Detectives reviewed every frame of surveillance again. If someone had accessed that space, they would have had to come and go through a narrow utility corridor. But the depot's exterior cameras showed no entries to that area after the 4th night. No one had walked in, no one had walked out. At least, not that they could see. The leading theory was chilling in its simplicity. Whoever had Claire moved her out sometime on day 4 and did it without triggering a single camera. Either they knew the blind spots or they used a route no one had accounted for, possibly underground access or a rear service entrance never documented. The town's reaction was swift. Shock, guilt, anger. Public trust in the investigation plummeted. Parents pulled their children out of after-school activities. Local news stations ran stories on depot security failures and police blind spots. Volunteers who had handed out flyers within walking distance of the depot now felt betrayed. Everyone asked the same question. How could she have been right there and no one knew? Rachel Manning broke down in front of reporters. Claire's father refused to speak publicly. Their home, once filled with search maps and printed photos, turned silent. Even Josh, her younger brother, stopped asking questions. He just sat on the edge of the couch each night, staring at the news, waiting for someone to say something that would make it all make sense. But there were no answers, just facts. Claire had been held in a hidden room inside a building that was searched. Her DNA proved she had been alive days after her disappearance, and yet no one had seen her. No one had heard a thing. And now, just like that, she is gone again. By the second week, the investigation into Claire Manning's disappearance had hit a terrifying rhythm. Leads emerged, hope rose, and then everything fell quiet again. But something shifted when a junior analyst at the state's Behavioral Crimes Division reviewed Claire's file and flagged a phrase in the incident summary. Unidentified male seen near transit facility, blue windbreaker, suspected communication via burner phone. It was oddly specific and disturbingly familiar. That analyst, working a backlog of cold missing persons cases, had seen something similar not once, but twice in the last 5 years. 2 other teenage girls, different towns, different years, but almost identical patterns. The first was in 2018. Amber Giles, 15, disappeared outside a Greyhound station in King City. Security footage showed her walking toward the lot behind the station around dusk. She'd told her mom she was taking the bus to visit her cousin. The ticket was never used. Her last known text, later pulled from phone records, was from an unknown number. Just 3 words. Out back, hurry. Amber never came home. Her phone was found days later, powered off and wiped clean. Her case was never solved. Then, in 2021, it happened again. This time in Carver Ridge. 17-year-old Naomi Cruz was headed home from her part-time job and was last seen at a light rail station near downtown. She'd messaged her sister that she was running late, but the timestamp didn't match her phone location. It showed she was already outside the station by the time the text was sent. CCTV captured a shadowed figure in a jacket, color unclear, walking closely behind her toward a gated service entrance. Her phone was later found in a trash can 3 blocks away. No witnesses, no viable suspects, and like Amber's case, no arrests. Now, Claire. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit requested full access to all 3 files and dispatched a senior profiler, Special Agent Miriam Lake, to consult on the Manning case. Known for her work on organized abduction patterns, Lake wasn't interested in speculation. She wanted patterns, consistencies, behaviors. Within days, she'd compiled a comparative timeline across the 3 girls. The similarities were undeniable. All 3 victims were teenage girls between the ages of 15 and 17. All vanished from public transportation hubs during off-peak hours. All had clean records, no prior signs of runaway risk, and were either alone or briefly separated from their group. Each had received some form of mysterious communication, brief, impersonal, and likely sent through a disposable device. In each case, security footage revealed a man trailing the victim by a short distance, never close enough to initiate physical contact on camera, but always headed in the same direction. He was never clearly identified. But the most chilling detail, in every case, the girls seemed to go willingly, at least at first. There were no signs of struggle, no attempts to run. As if they were meeting someone they expected, someone who had built their trust. Agent Lake's profile was clinical but sobering. She believed they were looking at a single offender, a socially adept, detail-oriented individual with high situational awareness and an intimate understanding of transportation environments. He likely knew security camera blind spots, shift rotations, and access points that the public wouldn't. Someone who had worked in or around these facilities, possibly maintenance, vending services, custodial. the kind of job that gave him movement across properties without drawing attention. She also believed he was patient. The timeline between abductions, 3 years between the first and second, nearly 2 between the second and Claire, suggested someone careful, methodical, someone who waited until the environment was perfect. He wasn't impulsive, he was deliberate, and he likely studied each victim beforehand, either in person or online. He'd have watched their routines, learned their behaviors. He knew when they were most vulnerable, at the end of the day, in transitional spaces, when no one was watching too closely. Law enforcement across jurisdictions reopened both previous cases. New searches were launched at the original sites. Old maintenance records were pulled, staff lists reviewed. But the problem was time. Too much had passed. Surveillance data was long gone. Personnel had changed. Physical spaces had been remodeled. Any hard evidence had long since evaporated. Still, the public was now aware. News outlets ran headlines like "Predator Targets Teens at Transit Hubs" and "Is a Pattern Emerging in Missing Girls Cases?" The towns involved braced for scrutiny. Parents were on edge. Rumors flooded forums. And beneath the noise, one hard truth emerged. This wasn't just about Claire anymore. It never had been. Claire's family, already stretched thin from grief, now wrestled with another cruel possibility. Their daughter may not have been chosen at random. She may have been watched, followed, selected. The comfort of believing it was a momentary lapse, a chance encounter, was gone. What remained was the sickening realization that someone out there had been planning this, waiting, and he had done it before. But the profiler's final note offered a sliver of hope, because a pattern can be tracked. If this man had taken 3 girls and waited between each, then he was likely preparing again. Somewhere, in another town, another transit hub, someone new might already be in his sights, and this time, they might still have a chance to stop him. Under dim fluorescent light in a county lab 2 hours outside Ash Valley, a technician isolated the most valuable footage yet, 3 seconds buried in corrupted frames pulled from the depot's rooftop surveillance camera. For days, they'd been feeding the raw video through frame-by-frame recovery, sharpening pixels, correcting compression errors. It was painstaking work, hours for single seconds, but the result would alter the direction of the investigation forever. At the 39th frame, after Claire Manning vanished behind the depot wall, an enhanced still finally caught it, the briefest flash of a man's face. The camera didn't catch it head-on, just a side profile blurred by distance and motion, but visible, undeniably, was a faint scar running vertically along the skin just below his left ear. Detectives pulled employee records again, focusing on anyone with known access to the depot's less trafficked zones: vendors, maintenance contractors, night workers. They expanded the radius to include contracted cleaning crews, vending machine suppliers, and waste management rotations. Then, one name surfaced: Michael Talbert, 42, employed by a custodial subcontractor responsible for off-hour cleaning at the Ash Valley Depot and 3 others across the state. He was low profile, rarely seen by daytime staff, usually clocked in between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. He didn't speak much, lived alone on the far edge of town, and most crucially, his driver's license photo showed a pale scar near his left ear. Investigators moved quickly, but when they arrived at his listed address, the house was empty. No forced entry, no signs of recent activity, just a thin layer of dust, a shut-off utilities notice, and a garage that had been locked from the inside. When they forced the door open, what they found confirmed everything and deepened the horror. Hanging from a peg on the wall was a blue windbreaker. Folded neatly beneath it, a stack of disposable gloves. The jacket's cuffs were swabbed for trace. Within hours, the lab confirmed it. Claire's DNA was present, small but undeniable, on the inside seam of the right sleeve, but that wasn't all. In the far corner of the garage, beneath a false floor panel inside an old storage trunk, detectives discovered a GoPro. It was dusty but intact. The memory card inside had been partially corrupted, requiring forensic recovery. But what came back wasn't just surveillance, it was personal. The first clear clip was time-stamped 9 days after Claire had gone missing. It showed a dimly lit room, concrete walls, no windows. The camera was propped in the corner, facing a mattress on the floor, and sitting there, hunched over her knees, was Claire. Pale, alert, quiet. Her arms were pulled tight around her chest. She looked off-camera repeatedly, waiting for something, listening. The timestamp was real, and the shock that followed rippled across every face that watched the clip. She had been alive just 2 days earlier. The video had no sound at first, but as the clip continued, the mic picked up a faint hum, likely from nearby plumbing. Then, Claire turned slightly toward the camera. Her voice was quiet, barely audible under the static hiss, but forensic enhancement isolated her words. She whispered, "He said I'd leave tonight." Then she looked down, and the clip ended. There were more files. Some were scrambled, just visual fragments of a wall, a ceiling, or someone walking past the lens. One showed a tray of food being placed near the mattress. Another caught Claire sleeping, partially covered by a thermal blanket. But none showed the man. He stayed out of frame, intentionally. The final clip recovered was dated 48 hours after the "he said I'd leave tonight" whisper. It was only 4 seconds long. The camera jolted as if moved in a hurry. Then, darkness. The footage ended. There. No new timestamps. No sign of Claire again. The implications were overwhelming. Claire had been held in a secondary location after the depot. The hidden room beneath the station was only the beginning. Talbert, now officially named as a person of interest, had known when and how to move her. He had likely prepped multiple holding spots. His knowledge of the area's infrastructure, his night shifts, and his ability to stay invisible were the perfect tools. But with him gone, so was any immediate hope of finding her. An Interstate BOLOB on the lookout was issued. Old surveillance footage from highway toll booths was reviewed. Investigators tried to track down the van Talbert was believed to drive, a 2004 silver Dodge Caravan, but the registration had expired. The VIN was last scanned at a scrapyard 6 months before Claire's disappearance, but it had never been scrapped. The plates were pulled. It was likely running under the radar. Public pressure surged. News anchors read Claire's whisper on national broadcasts. "He said I'd leave tonight." Online forums exploded with theories, some believing she had escaped and was still hiding. Others feared the worst. But the video proved something law enforcement had never been able to say until now. Claire had survived at least 9 days in captivity, and someone had recorded her. The case, once murky, now had a name, a face, a timeline, and a vehicle. But still, no Claire, no location, no closure. And behind every development, one haunting truth remained. She had believed she was going to be released. He told her she would leave, but the footage never showed what that meant, whether she walked out or was carried, whether she was given freedom or just another lie. And 2 days later, all that remained was a silent garage, a missing girl, and a GoPro that proved she had been so much closer than anyone dared to imagine. 9 days after Claire Manning disappeared, she was still alive. That was no longer a theory or wishful thinking. It was a fact burned into a recovered video file, extracted from a locked trunk in the garage of a man now missing himself. A man with a scar just below his left ear. A man who knew the depot, worked graveyard shifts, moved in the background of Ash Valley without ever being seen. Michael Talbert, custodial contractor, 42 years old, no criminal history, no social media, no next of kin. He'd vanished as quietly as he had operated for years, unnoticed, unbothered, and now he was gone. The discovery of Claire's DNA on the jacket inside his garage was enough to issue a formal warrant, but by then it was already too late. Talbert had disappeared sometime within 24 hours of the hidden footage being enhanced. Whether he knew he was being hunted or simply followed a backup plan, no one could say. His cell phone had been abandoned, bank accounts untouched, no purchases, no digital trail. Like Claire, he simply vanished. Authorities searched tirelessly. Tips poured in from every direction. Sightings of the van, Possible connections to storage units and trailers across state lines. One woman in Colorado claimed she'd seen Claire in a diner restroom. A gas station clerk in Nevada was sure a girl with the same hair and build had passed through on foot, wearing mismatched clothes and looking nervous. Each lead was investigated. Each came up cold. The last confirmed location where Claire had been was that dim storage unit in the depot. There were no cameras inside, no fingerprints beyond hers and Talbert's. Forensic sweep showed no signs of violence, no blood, no struggle. Just the eerie traces of occupancy. Blankets, wrappers, her DNA. The final image of her on the recovered GoPro was time-stamped 2 days after the police had first searched the area. The whisper still echoed in every detective's mind. He said I'd leave tonight. But leave how? The video ended in darkness, the camera jostled, then silence. No follow-up clip, no confirmed departure. It was impossible to say if Claire had walked out of that room or if she'd been carried. Rachel and Dan Manning, once quiet, cooperative, were now publicly angry. Their grief had changed shape. They began holding community meetings, demanding accountability. They questioned why Claire hadn't been found sooner, why maintenance areas weren't swept thoroughly. They kept a table by their front window filled with newspaper clippings, maps, photocopies of security footage, and a digital frame that looped the last image of Claire, whispering to the lens. Her younger brother, Josh, still set the porch light on every night, just in case. The case didn't close. It couldn't. Her face remained on flyers, online directories, and cold case databases. The FBI continued to classify her as missing, presumed endangered. A composite sketch of Talbert, digitally aged and sharpened, circulated through law enforcement bulletins across state lines. His van, though never found, became a ghost in countless traffic stops. A silver Dodge Caravan with no plates, no papers, and no trace. Claire's case became one of those stories that refused to fade. Every few months it returned, briefly, to public attention. Another sighting, another truck stop, another waitress swearing she saw her in the corner booth. But the footage, the real indisputable evidence, remained unchanged. One moment in time. Claire, sitting on that mattress, arms wrapped tight around her knees, eyes flickering toward the camera. Her voice, soft but certain, saying she believed she'd leave that night, that she thought he would let her go. Some people believe she did. The Talbert, for whatever reason, set her free and went underground. That she's out there somewhere, traumatized and unwilling to return. Others believe she never made it out of that room, that leaving meant something darker, something permanent. One theory, quietly held by a small group of investigators, pointed to another possibility, that Claire had been moved again. The Talbert wasn't working alone, that the 2-day delay between her whisper and the video's final timestamp had been enough time to pass her to someone else. The footage revealed planning, precision. A man who knew his risks and worked in silence. If he had an accomplice, someone equally invisible, Claire could have been relocated before law enforcement ever closed in. But there was no evidence to prove it, just questions, endless questions. And over time, the noise faded. Not entirely, but enough. Other stories took the spotlight, other disappearances, other tragedies. The posters stayed up, but they yellowed around the edges. The number on the flyers changed as tips slowed down. Even the Have You Seen Claire Facebook group began to stall, its members drifting away until only a handful remained, posting anniversaries, memories, hope. Yet for those closest to her, her parents, her brother, her best friend Sophie, there was no moving on. Claire's story had no ending, just a pause, a stillness they woke up to every morning, a silence that grew louder with each year she stayed gone. And behind it all, one image remained frozen in time. Claire Manning, 9 days after she vanished, alive and whispering to a hidden camera in a room no one knew existed. Her hair tied back, her voice soft, her eyes tired, her last recorded words hanging in the air. He said I'd leave tonight, but no one knows if she did.